To demonstrate adjusting the font face and the font size, I'm going to continue using the document I developed in the previous video.
This video is brought to you by Abby Pie's Academy.
Here we've got some lyrics to the song Scarborough Fair, and I've already adjusted the color and the font weight and font style of a couple of the different elements here using the H1 and the P selectors. And you can see the result over here on the right in the actual browser window. So let's say we wanted to change the font face of the H2 tag. So I'm going to write an H2 selector, and then I'm going to use the font family rule. Now, choosing a font family isn't as simple as doing it in your word processor. And that's because the user who's viewing your document has to have the font family you select on their machine. So if I choose a weird font that they don't have, it's not going to display correctly. Now you can see here that I'm getting various choices from the environment, from my brackets text editor. Cursive, fantasy, inherit, monospace, etc. These aren't actually specific fonts. These are categories of fonts. So if I were to choose one of these, for example, cursive, then the browser is going to look for whatever cursive font the user has on their machine. So this is my default cursive font. I don't even know what that is. Or if I choose, for example, a monospace font, meaning every character occupies the same amount of space, it'll choose a monospace font, which in this case I believe is Courier. Now, I can also choose specific font families or specific fonts. So, for example, let's say we wanted this to be Arial, which is pretty much universal. I can choose font family Arial, and it gives me an Arial font. I can also choose, for example, Verdana, which is another fairly universal font and generally a good pick. Another example would be Georgia. So that's Georgia displayed there in the H2. So as long as the user has the font you select on their machine, you're okay. Let's try Helvetica. Now, Helvetica is common on Macs, but not so common on PCs. So if this were displayed on a PC, it might not display the right font. For example, I don't know, let me just do this. That's not a real font. The browser doesn't know what to do, so it defaults back to whatever the default style sheet says, since I don't have a Helvetica XXX font on my machine. So you've got to choose fonts that the user has. Now, another thing you can do, since you obviously don't know what fonts a user might have on their machine, is use a list of fonts like this. This is how I typically do it. So here I'm saying, okay, first see if the user has Arial. If they have Arial, choose that. If not, try Helvetica. And if they don't have Helvetica, try any sans serif font that you have. So then I kind of default to the category. So here it's trying Arial, Helvetica, and then sans serif for the H2. So there we've got the font family, and I can choose a font family for any part of my content. So for example, let's say I wanted H1 and H2 to appear in Arial or Helvetica or a sans serif. I actually can change my selector like this. So now we're saying, okay, select H1 and H2 tags and apply this font rule, giving us the font family Arial, Helvetica, etc. Let's save and take a look at the results. So now you see both of these are appearing in the Arial font. Now we can also change the font size. Now font size is measured a number of different ways, and this can get kind of confusing because you can use traditional points, which is really from type design. Like I could say, okay, I want the points to be 18 point, and that'll render both of those at 18 point, or something much bigger, 38 point. But point sizes only really relate to print design, so it doesn't make as much sense to use them here. Now you could also use pixels, which means it measures 38 pixels high. That's going to be a little smaller. But what I like to use is something called M's. So if I set it at 1M, that's going to default to essentially 12 points, or what's the standard font size in the user's browser. If I go to 2M, that'll double it. So essentially what I'm saying is, here, make it 2 times normal, or 2.5 times normal by making it 2.5M. If I want it smaller than normal, I could say, for example, 0.75M, and now it's smaller than whatever's normal. Now, the reason this is good is if the user increases their font size, you can see that this is still based on whatever kind of the user's baseline is. So if I say, for example, 2M, and we refresh, it's twice whatever the user's normal is. So it's one way to look at it. So I like using M's as a way to adjust font size. And of course, we could adjust the font size for any of these elements. For example, I could say font size 0.9M, just make a drop smaller. And you can see the font size reduced here. All right, so we've gone over creating rules to change the font family and using multiple fonts to make sure that the user has a font on their machine. And then finally, the font size to change by increasing or decreasing the font size within your document.